Welcome back. We've just created a scrolling line effect on our material, and now we're going to work on how to turn this material on and off with code. We're going to start with our post-process material, and we're going to create some functions to do this in C++. So let's go back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to create a couple of functions on the item class. Now, let's go up to our protected section where we have our protected functions and create a couple of functions. Now, I'm going to make these virtual because these are going to be changing properties of the item mesh, but for the ammo, we're using a different mesh. So we're going to need to override this function in the ammo to select the correct mesh. So we're going to make these virtual, and they're going to be void functions. I'm going to create a function called enable custom depth. And this is going to essentially allow custom depth for our mesh. We're going to create another virtual void function and call this disable custom depth. Let's give these functions function bodies. There's the one for enable custom depth. Now I'll create one for disable custom depth. Now these functions are going to be pretty simple. For enable custom depth, we're going to access our item mesh, and we're going to call a function on the uSkeletalMesh class called setRenderCustomDepth. And this takes a Boolean. We're going to pass in true to enable the custom depth. Now for disable custom depth, we're going to call the same function, except we're going to pass in false. Now, in order to initialize this, I'm going to create a function called initializeRenderCustomDepth. It's going to be a void function. It's also going to be virtual. Initialize custom depth. And I'm going to create a function body for this. And this one's going to simply be calling disable custom depth. And this way we'll set custom depth to disabled from the start, so we can call initialize custom depth in begin play. So let's go ahead and do that in item.cpp. I'll go up to begin play, and at the bottom I'm going to call initialize custom depth, and I'll give this a comment saying set custom depth to disabled. Now we made these virtual so we can override them. Let's override them in the ammo class. So here in ammo.h, up here in the protected section, let's override these functions. So we're going to say virtual void, and we'll say enable custom depth override. And we'll do the same for disable. Virtual void disable custom depth override, and we'll create some function bodies for these. For enable custom depth, all we need to do is the same thing we did on item, only we're going to use the ammo mesh instead. So we're going to say ammo mesh set render custom depth to true. I'll go ahead and copy this, and we can close that, and now give disable custom depth a function body. And we'll give this the same thing, except we'll use false. So let's compile this. And in the editor, if we press play, we'll see now that all of our weapons here no longer have the highlight from that post-process material. Now take a look at the ammo. The outlines are gone for these as well. Now, even though we didn't override the function initialize custom depth, it's still being called in item.cpp here in begin play. And so on the ammo objects, we get the override version because we did override enable custom depth and disable custom depth. And initialize custom depth calls disable custom depth. So on begin play, each of these objects gets their custom depth disabled. Now, when do we call enable custom depth? Now, we want to show the material when we hover and show the widget. So in order to do that, we're going to go into our shootercharacter.cpp file, and let's take a look at trace for items. Now here in trace for items, we're setting the pickup widget visibility. This is a good spot to enable custom depth here. So we've already cast to a item, so we know that trace hit item, if we're in this if statement, has been cast to an a item, so we can call that function enable custom depth. So we're going to say trace hit item enable custom depth. Now we're calling this from here in the shooter character class, which means that enable custom depth actually needs to be public. So let's go back to item.h and let's take enable and disable custom depth and move these into the public section. So we'll go down all the way to the bottom and stick these down here. Now we're overwriting these in ammo.h and we're going to need to stick these in the public section as well. So let's go down to the public section and paste these two functions here. Now in shooterCharacter.cpp, we can call enable custom depth. Now in trace for items, there's a couple spots where we set the visibility for the widget to false. For example, we do it here when we hit an A item last frame, but we're tracing on a different A item this frame. So we're going to call disable custom depth on the trace hit item last frame. That's the object that we're setting visibility to false on. So we're going to say trace hit item last frame disable custom depth. Let's keep scrolling down here and we'll see that we're setting the visibility for trace hit item last frame to false here as well. This is in the else if when B should trace for items is false. We're seeing if B should trace for items is false, but we hit an item last frame, then we're setting its visibility to false. We're also going to disable its custom depth here. So let's go ahead and compile this and see what it looks like now when we trace for items. All right, we're back in the editor. Let's hit play and we'll go ahead and come up to one of these items and trace. And of course we're seeing the widget and it's a little bit, it's sort of covering the item, so it's kind of hard to see on the ammo, but we can go over here to the guns and see it a little better. So before we wrap this up, let's take care of this issue with the widget being too low on the ammo. I'm going to go to ammo 9mm BP and click on pickup widget and just drag it up a little bit. That way we can hit play and come over and trace, and now we can see the outline working just fine. Okay, excellent. So this will conclude this video. We now have the ability to enable the custom depth for a particular object while tracing, and we're doing that by calling functions that we created in C++. Now we're going to continue with this in the next video by taking care of other scenarios, such as when we pick up a weapon, when we throw a weapon down, and things like that. So stay tuned. We'll see you in the next video.